Hi, I'm Elizabeth Cowan. This is my presentation for General Biochemistry 2 at Mississippi State University for spring 2022. My topic is uric acid, gout, and cherry consumption. And these are the two articles we'll be reviewing. The first one is Cherry Consumption and Decreased Risk of Recurrent Gout Attack. That was published in the Journal of Arthritis and Rheumatism in December of 2012. And the other one here is Consumption of Cherries Lowers Plasma Urate in Healthy Women. This one was published in the Journal of Human Nutrition and Metabolism Research Communication in June of 2003. So first off, what is gout? Gout is defined as an excruciatingly painful inflammatory arthritis caused by the crystallization of uric acid within the joints. And you can see in that illustration over there, it almost looks like they have like sand between their joints, which would obviously be very painful. 3.8 million adults suffer from gout in the United States alone, and that's 3.9% of our adult population. And there's some risk factors that contribute to you being more or less likely to develop gout. Men are more likely to suffer from it than women, and obesity is a really big risk factor that I highlighted because it gives you sort of what we call like a treadmill effect, where if you are obese and you develop gout, then that's going to make it more difficult, more painful to exercise, which perpetuates the obesity, which doesn't help the gout situation. And King Henry VIII of England is kind of the famous example of this, of somebody who had gout. And at the time of his death, he was so large that he was buried in a square coffin. Alcoholism can also be a major contributor to developing gout, and as well as certain diets, which we will get into in some more detail later. So what causes gout? Well, the body makes uric acid when it breaks down purines obtained from the diet. And I put up our pathway over there from our textbook about how precisely that happens, how adenine and guanine are deaminated and phosphorylated to lead to uric acid. So obviously, if uric acid is synthesized from the breakdown of purines, then a high purine diet is going to significantly increase your risk of gout. So some high purine foods include things like red meat, organ meat, and then some kinds of seafood such as anchovies, sardines, mussels, scallops, trout, and tuna. So if you find yourself eating a lot of those things, then you may be someone who might look at potentially developing gout in the future. So an overabundance of uric acid causes this condition called hyperuricemia. And hyperuricemia doesn't always lead to gout, but everyone who has gout has hyperuricemia. So when you have too much uric acid, at some point your body will begin to convert it into monosodium urate, which is the form that ends up building up in your joints, fluids, and tissues, and that is what causes gout. And you can see that reaction there on the bottom right-hand corner, how sodium is added onto these deprotonated oxygens. And I thought these pictures were really neat. On the left, we have the chemical structure of monosodium urate crystals. And you can see like the way they bond, how they form these sort of flat shards. And then on the right-hand side, we have a microscopic image. So you can see how it makes a sort of needle-like structure and how that might be very painful if it builds up between the joints. Consumption of cherries has been reported to alleviate this arthritic pain and gout. And until just very recently, this idea of cherry consumption to prevent gout attacks has been largely anecdotal and had not been confirmed in any controlled nutritional studies until these studies that we're about to go over. So it was something people did because they knew other people who said that it helped, but we didn't know if that was necessarily true or just like an old wives' tale. And if it was true, then we definitely didn't know precisely what compounds in cherries might be responsible for these sort of anti-inflammatory properties, or how this may have worked biochemically. So this first study, which is the cherry consumption and decreased risk of recurrent gout attacks, that was published in the Arthritis and Rheumatism Journal, was a study that was conducted via a survey and monitor analysis. 633 American adults who were diagnosed with gout were monitored for attacks over a 1-year time span and surveyed on their cherry consumption behavior, as well as any other behavior that may affect the results of this study. So they were asked about things such as their alcohol consumption, any sort of medications they were on, or the level of purine intake in their diet. So my first question is, why were these metrics, such as these behaviors that they were asked about, like alcohol consumption and such, why were these important to the study, and how could the results of the study been changed if the researchers had not taken these behaviors into account? So you may want to pause the video and work out your answer to that one. So moving on, they did in fact find that cherry consumption does in fact reduce the frequency of gout attacks. And this was by like a fairly significant margin as well, because of this cherry intake over a 2-day period was associated with a 35% lower risk of gout attack compared to people who had no cherry intake at all. So this study definitely confirmed, there's something there that we need to look into, but it didn't really go into the whole biochemistry of what might be happening with these cherries that may reduce uric acid in the body, or at least provide some sort of anti-inflammatory properties. But this study, the consumption of cherries lowers plasma urate in healthy women study, did go into the biochemistry of it. So in this study, test subjects were healthy women aged 22 to 40 years old. They were asked to fast overnight, then consume 2 servings of cherries. And then both the blood and urine samples were taken from the subjects and analyzed before and at regular intervals afterwards, after that cherry consumption. Then researchers measured the plasma urate, antioxidant, and inflammatory markers in those blood and urine samples. So my second question of the day was, so this study focused on healthy women while the last one focused on people with gout. So what could be one reason that in this study these researchers studied healthy women rather than subjects diagnosed with gout? So in this study, decreased rates of nitrous oxide and C-reactive protein were observed after cherry consumption. And these are 2 molecules that are associated with the inflammatory process. So it seems that cherry is doing something to inhibit those molecules. And then I'll leave you guys with this sort of proposed pathway, which is what researchers think is probably happening now with cherries and their anti-inflammatory properties, especially with gout and arthritis. They seem to think that it's the phenol structures in cherries that is raising antioxidant enzyme activity, among other things, lowering oxidative stress, and that in turn decreases nitrous oxide, COX-2 activity, serum CRP, and other sort of things that are associated with inflammation.